My family faked my mom's death to steal my savings, so I destroyed their lives. In my family, there was always an unspoken rule. Because I was the only one without a wife and kids, my money wasn't really my money. It was the family emergency fund. I was the responsible one, the one with a stable job and the savings account, which in their eyes made me the designated bailout specialist. Over the years, I'd covered everything. My brother's unexpected car repairs that happened every 6 months, my sister's emergency vet bills for a dog that was perfectly healthy, my dad's string of bad luck, investments that needed just one more cash injection to turn around. Each time, I'd sigh, transfer the money, and tell myself that this is just what family does. You show up for each other. At least, that's the lie I used to tell myself to make the resentment go down a little easier. 3 months ago, that lie finally choked me. The call that started it all came from my sister, Chloe. I picked up the phone to the sound of hysterical, gasping sobs. It was a practice sound, one I'd heard many times before, usually preceding a request for a few $100s. But this time, it felt different. "It's Mom," she choked out between breaths. "She has a serious heart condition. She collapsed at the grocery store. They said she needs surgery like right now." I felt a jolt of pure, cold fear. My mom, despite her knack for dramatic sighs, had always been the rock of our family. The idea of her being seriously ill was unimaginable. Chloe went on, her voice a carefully constructed blend of panic and sorrow. The insurance wouldn't cover the whole procedure. There was a $15,000 gap, and the hospital wouldn't schedule the surgery without the funds up front. Dad had already maxed out his credit cards, and my brother, Mark, was still in a financial hole from his last brilliant business idea involving reselling vintage sneakers. They needed help, and they needed it fast. The pressure campaign began immediately after that first call. It was a coordinated, multi-front assault on my emotions and my bank account. My mom would call, her voice weak and trembling, telling me she was scared, that she understood if I couldn't help, but that she didn't know how much time she had. Then my dad would get on the phone, a man who hadn't shown me an ounce of affection in years, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about the possibility of having to postpone the surgery indefinitely, a risk the doctors had apparently advised against. Chloe was the director of this whole production. She sent me photos from the hospital, my mom in her own bed, but with a blood pressure cuff on her arm, looking frail and terrified. The photos were grainy, angled just right to look clinical and dire. They'd even hooked up some old electronic device with blinking lights next to her bed to simulate a monitor. The texts were relentless. "The doctors are saying time is critical. Mom keeps asking for you. We're all just praying for a miracle." A miracle, I knew, had a very specific dollar amount attached to it. For 3 years, I had been working my tail off, saving for a down payment on a house. Every extra shift I picked up, every weekend I spent at the office instead of with friends, every sad dinner of instant noodles. It was all for that one goal. I had $18,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account. It was my entire future. It was my ticket out of renting, my chance to finally build something for myself. It was everything. But what was a house compared to my mother's life? What kind of son would I be if I chose a mortgage over my own mom? They had me, and they knew it. I stared at my online banking portal for a full hour, watching the number that represented years of my life and sacrifice. Then, with a heavy heart and a shaking hand, I transferred every last cent to my dad's account. The gratitude was overwhelming, so thick and effusive it felt almost suffocating. My mom cried, actual sobs of relief, telling me I had saved her life, that I was her hero. My dad, in a move that shocked me to my core, drove to my apartment and gave me a hug, the first one I could remember since I was a little kid. He told me he was proud of the man I had become. So selfless and giving. Chloe posted a long, gushing tribute on Facebook about having the most amazing brother in the world, and the comments poured in from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all praising me for stepping up. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the family ATM, I was the family hero. It was a heady, addictive feeling, and it almost made the gaping hole in my savings account feel worth it. For the next 2 weeks, I lived on that feeling. I was completely broke, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and turning down invitations from friends because I couldn't even afford a beer. But I had saved my mom. I had done the right thing. I was a good son, a good brother. I was walking on air, high on my own martyrdom. That's what my cousin Jake called. Jake was one of the few people in my family who had never asked me for money. He was a straight shooter, a good guy. He sounded excited, a little confused. "Hey man, congrats on your mom's recovery. She's looking great. I just saw some photos on Mark's Instagram story. That cruise looks amazing." I didn't know she was well enough for something like that. The line went quiet. I could hear him breathing, waiting for me to respond. But I couldn't. The words didn't make sense. Cruise? My mom was supposed to be in bed, recovering from major heart surgery. "What are you talking about, Jake?" I finally managed to say, my voice sounding distant and strange. "The cruise," he repeated. "The whole family's on one. Mark's been posting up a storm. Mom, Dad, Chloe, all their kids. Looks like they're having a blast. Tropical drinks, fancy dinners, the works. The pictures are from like 2 days ago. My stomach didn't just drop, it plummeted. It felt like I had swallowed a block of ice. I mumbled some excuse and hung up the phone, my hand shaking so hard I could barely hit the screen. I immediately pulled up Instagram. There it was. Mark's profile, which was usually private, was suddenly public. And his story was a highlight reel of my stolen future. Dozens of photos and videos. The whole family, smiling and tan, on the deck of a massive, gleaming cruise ship. There was my mom, looking healthier and more vibrant than I'd seen her in a decade, dancing with my dad, a colorful cocktail in her hand. There was Chloe, posing in a new bikini by the pool. There was Mark, doing a cannonball into the water with his kids. Formal dinners in elegant dining rooms, shore excursions to private, white sand beaches, champagne toasts at sunset. They were living their best life, a life I had paid for under the assumption that my mother was dying. I drove to my parents' house in a blind rage, the screenshots on my phone burning a hole in my pocket. My mom answered the door, a fresh tan highlighting the lines on her face. The second she saw me, her smile faltered. She had the decency to look guilty, at least for a second. That's all I needed to know. I held up my phone, showing her a picture of her raising a margarita glass on the ship's Lido deck. Some recovery, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She didn't even try to deny it. She just let out a long, weary sigh, the kind she used when she was mildly inconvenienced. We figured you'd find out eventually, she said, as if I discovered they'd eaten the last cookie. We were just hoping it would be after we got back and had a chance to rest. The rest of them filtered into the living room, drawn by the confrontation. There was no heart condition, no surgery, no medical emergency. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted, 6-month-long con. My mom had a routine checkup, and they used her normal, boring paperwork as a template. My dad, who was surprisingly good with computers, had scanned the documents, edited them to create fake diagnoses and fraudulent hospital bills, and printed them on high-quality paper. They had planned this family reunion cruise for months, a luxury trip that I was, of course, deliberately excluded from, because they needed me to be the funding source, not a participant. Their justifications were even more insulting than the lie itself. Chloe, ever the drama queen, said they all deserve a nice vacation after working so hard. Dad, with a straight face, told me that I made more money than any of them, so it wasn't like I'd really missed the $18,000. But it was my mother's explanation that truly broke me. She put a hand on my arm, her expression a sickening performance of maternal concern. "Honey, we knew you'd want us to enjoy ourselves instead of worrying about money," she said softly. "You should be happy that your gift was used for something that brought the whole family together." But the final, soul-crushing blow came from my brother, Mark. Maybe he was feeling a flicker of guilt, or maybe he was just drunk on post-vacation arrogance. He pulled out his phone. "Look, man, don't be like that," he slurred, shoving the screen in my face. It was a group chat, titled Operation Down Payment. It had been created 6 months ago. The members, Mom, Dad, Chloe, Mark. Me, conspicuously absent. I scrolled through the messages, my vision blurring with rage. They were joking about how gullible I was. They had made actual bets on how long it would take me to hand over the money once they played the dying mother card. There were laughing emojis next to messages about how I always fell for their sob stories. "He's such a sucker," one of Chloe's messages read. "It's almost too easy." They had even brainstormed ideas for future fake emergencies. A fake car accident for Mark. A bogus lawsuit against Dad's business. My entire family, my own mother, had turned scamming me into a fun little group activity. I stared at the screen, at the casual cruelty of their words, and something inside me just snapped. The part of me that loved them, the part that made excuses for them, the part that felt obligated to them. It all just withered and died in that moment. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just turned and walked out of that house without another word. But I wasn't done. Oh, not even close. They thought they had one. They thought they had gotten away with it. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. Because being the family's personal ATM for a decade had one unintended side effect. I knew every dirty little secret about their finances. And I had access to information that they had long forgotten they'd ever given me. Why did Next didn't just get my money back? It dismantled their entire world, brick by fraudulent brick. I drove home in a state of cold, crystalline rage. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching chasm in my chest, but it was being rapidly overtaken by a powerful, clarifying sense of purpose. They had treated me like an idiot, a mark, a tool to be used and discarded. They were about to find out how sharp that tool could be. I knew exactly where to start. My sister, Chloe, had been bragging for years on social media about her successful online boutique, where she sold handmade, artisanal jewelry. The truth, which I knew because I'd helped her set up her bookkeeping software when she first started, was that she bought cheap, mass-produced junk from overseas websites and resold it at a massive markup. She never bothered to change the passwords to her business accounts, and a quick check confirmed I still had full access. A few hours of digging revealed exactly what I suspected. Years of undeclared cash income, blatant tax fraud, where she wrote off personal vacations as business trips, and a mountain of angry customer emails she had simply ignored. Mark's situation was even more precarious. He had a side hustle fixing cars in his garage, all cash, all off the books. I had a camera roll full of photos from family barbecues showing his yard looking like a used car lot, plus a string of old text messages where he'd casually asked me for advice on how to shuffle money between accounts to avoid complications. The real kicker, though, was that for the past year, he had been collecting unemployment benefits while running this little cash-only enterprise. I was fairly certain the state's Department of Labor would be very interested to learn about that. But my parents were the main event. They had the most to lose. Dad had been doing under-the-table contracting work for as long as I could remember, always complaining about taxes while pocketing wads of cash. Mom had her own online business selling homemade crafts that were like Chloe's jewelry, cheap imports she simply repackaged. Their real genius, however, was in hiding their money. They had a network of bank accounts, some under variations of their name, some under business names that didn't legally exist. And I knew about every single one of them, because in their arrogance, they had used me as a financial reference when opening them years ago, never imagining I'd remember the details. I spent the next week methodically gathering my ammunition. I downloaded bank statements, archived text messages, organized photos with timestamps, and cross-referenced everything to create a detailed, undeniable portrait of a family whose entire lifestyle was built on a foundation of fraud. They hadn't just been scamming me. They had been scamming the government, their customers, and their community for years, all while crying poverty to me. My first move was subtle. I created a few anonymous email accounts and began a quiet campaign against Chloe's boutique. I sent her biggest clients and a few popular fashion bloggers in our area a polite email containing side-by-side comparisons of her artisanal products and the exact same items for sale on a Chinese wholesale website for pennies on the dollar. Within days, her online reviews plummeted. The comment sections on her social media posts filled with accusations of fraud. The chargebacks and refund requests started pouring in. She called me, sobbing, complaining that some jealous hater was trying to destroy her business. I sat across from her at my mom's kitchen table, patting her hand and offering my deepest sympathies, while simultaneously using my phone under the table to forward more evidence to another angry customer. It was a masterclass in duplicity, one I had learned from the best. Mark's comeuppance came next. A simple, anonymous tip to the state's unemployment fraud hotline was all it took. The tip included a link to a private photo gallery I'd created, showcasing a greatest hits collection of him working on cars, complete with timestamps that conveniently matched the dates he was certifying that he was unemployed and unable to find work. The state launched an investigation immediately. Suddenly, he was facing not just the repayment of thousands of dollars in benefits, but potential felony fraud charges. He showed up at my apartment, pale and sweating, begging me to lend him money for a good lawyer. "I can't, Mark," I said, my voice dripping with false regret. "I'm completely broke, remember? I gave everything I had for Mom's surgery." The way his face fell as he processed the crushing irony was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. My parents required a more delicate touch. I couldn't go after them directly without exposing my hand. So I opted for social warfare. I started planting seeds of doubt within their social circle. A casual comment to a family friend about how amazing it was that Dad could afford a new truck right after Mom's expensive surgery. A curious question to a neighbor about Mom's new, very expensive-looking jewelry. Soon, their friends and neighbors were asking them uncomfortable questions. How could they afford all these nice things if they were in such dire financial straits just a few months ago? The real knockout blow, however, was delivered to their church. They had made a big show of asking the congregation for prayers and had accepted donations from a bake sale held to help with Mom's medical expenses. I anonymously sent the church pastor an email containing the cruise photos, clearly dated during the period of Mom's supposed recovery. The pastor, a man who had personally prayed with my dad over his wife's health, was horrified. My parents were quietly asked not to return. They were now pariahs in the one community where their reputation had been everything. The implosion was beautiful to watch, but I was still out $18,000. That's when I remembered the annual family reunion, a big weekend gathering at my aunt's lake house. This year, I decided the reunion would have a slightly different guest list. I called my aunt, feigning concern over Mom's difficult recovery, and suggested we should make this year's reunion extra special to lift her spirits. My aunt, who was not in on the cruise scam, was thrilled by my thoughtfulness. I convinced her to let me handle all the planning and, more importantly, the deposits for the rental cabins and catering. Then, the deception began. I called each of my immediate family members with a different story. I told Chloe the reunion was canceled because of a feud between some other cousins. I told Mark it was postponed indefinitely due to a scheduling conflict. I gave my parents a fake date, 2 weeks after the actual event. I made each of them promise to keep it quiet to avoid spreading family drama. The real reunion went off without a hitch. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin was there. Everyone except my parents, Chloe, and Mark. The truth came out just as I knew it would. Jake casually mentioned the cruise photos to my aunt. Another relative asked about mom's surgery and was stunned to learn it was a fabrication. By the end of the weekend, the entire extended family knew the full story of the scam. My parents found out when they drove up to the lake house 2 weeks later, ready for a party, only to find the place empty and a bill waiting for them from the owner. Apparently, their son had canceled their reservation and received a full refund weeks ago. Chloe discovered the truth when her customers started demanding to know why she was a no-show at a major craft fair she had paid to be a vendor at. Another event I had helpfully canceled on her behalf, pocketing the vendor fee refund. They started turning on each other, just as I predicted, each accusing the others of sabotage, never once suspecting it was me pulling all the strings from the shadows. But I still didn't have my money. Mom, in a final desperate act, made her biggest mistake. She tried the same trick again, this time sending an email to the extended family claiming Dad needed emergency gallbladder surgery. But the well was poisoned. My aunt immediately forwarded me the email with a note saying, "Can you believe in Irv?" I now had everything I needed. I compiled all the evidence into a single damning folder. The fake medical bills from both surgeries, the cruise photos, the group chat screenshots, the proof of their various tax and unemployment frauds. I invited them over for one last family dinner. They arrived looking beaten down and wary, probably expecting another lecture or a plea for reconciliation. Instead, I calmly laid out a printed copy of the folder on the dining room table. I walked them through everything I had done, every canceled reservation, every anonymous tip, every exposed lie. I showed them how I had systematically dismantled their lives using the very same tactics of deception and manipulation they had used on me for years. The silence in the room was absolute. Mom started to cry real, ugly tears this time. Dad's face was a pale, sweaty mask of terror. My siblings just stared at the table, looking like they'd been physically struck. But I wasn't finished. I opened my laptop and showed them a draft email. The recipients were the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the state's unemployment office, and the district attorney. Attached was the folder of evidence. "Here's the deal," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You have 48 hours to return every single penny of my $18,000. I don't care how you get it. Sell your cars, sell your jewelry, get second jobs. You figure it out. If that money is not in my account in 48 hours, I click send." Mark stammered that they'd spent it all on the cruise. I pulled up recent social media posts. Dad's new motorcycle, Mom's kitchen renovation, Chloe's new inventory. They had assets. They just didn't want to part with them. "But we're family," Mom whispered, her last pathetic attempt at manipulation. "Family doesn't do this to each other." I looked her straight in the eye. "Family doesn't create a secret group chat to bet on how fast they can scam their own son," I replied. "Family doesn't steal their son's life savings to go on a vacation they were deliberately excluded from. We stopped being family the moment you did that." The next 48 hours were a flurry of desperate, pathetic tactics. Guilt trips, angry voicemails, threats to cut me off for good, which was a laughable threat at this point. With 6 hours to go, they finally broke. The money started trickling in. $8,000 from my parents, $5,000 from Chloe, and finally, with just minutes to spare, $5,000 in cash from Mark, who had been forced to sell his prized motorcycle. I counted it all in front of them, then I pulled up the draft email, and as they watched, I deleted it. But not before they saw me save a copy of the evidence folder to 3 separate encrypted drives. "This doesn't make us even," I told them as they stood to leave. "This just means you're not going to prison. We're done. Lose my number. Lose my address. We are finished." Dad tried to get the last word. "You destroyed our lives over money," he spat. "How does that make you any better than us?" "I didn't destroy your lives," I said, looking at the man I once called my father. "I just stopped protecting you from them. Everything that's happening to you now is a direct consequence of your own choices. I just finally let the bill come due." In the months that followed, their lives continued to unravel, all without any further intervention from me. Chloe's boutique went bankrupt. Mark had to sell his tools to fully pay back the state. My parents were audited and hit with massive penalties for tax evasion. And I took my $18,000 and 6 months later, I finally bought my house. A small starter home, perfect for one. No one from my immediate family has ever been invited inside. My life is quiet now and peaceful. The last I heard, they were all still blaming each other for the downfall. It was never their greed, never their deception. It was always someone else's fault. But that's not my problem anymore. They made their bed of lies, and now they're forced to lie in it. And I've never slept better.